This week's parsha is Parshat Behaalotcha, and we'll be focusing in on the first two psukim, where it says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor, daber el Aaron v'amartai elav Behaalotcha et hanerot el mul pnei hamenorah ye'iru shivat hanerot." Right. So what it says is, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps toward the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast light." Now on the Behaalotcha, which is an unusual word, right? Why does it say Behaalotcha and not Behadlikcha, right? When you light the lamps, instead it says Behaalotcha, when you raise the lamps. What does that mean? So it says Rashi, he's honing in on this question. Behaalotcha, right? And he quotes the Gemara there in Shabbat, where it says as follows: "This teaches us that the Kohen must engage in kindling until the flame rises up on its own." That's the first explanation. But then Rashi continues, right? From here, so our rabbis further expounded from here that there was a step in front of the menorah upon which the Kohen would stand and kindle. Now this Behaalotcha then seems to be talking about two things. It's either talking about the raising up of the lights or the raising up of the Kohen. Now, there's no question that if you just read this pasuk, it's for sure talking about the lights. So where do we come to say, oh, well, it's also raising up the Kohen? That doesn't seem to be what the pasuk is saying. So Rav Leib Gerwitz, as stated, by the way, this whole Dvar Torah, no surprise, comes from Rav Bernstein in his sefer, the Call of Sinai. Rav Leib Gerwitz says as follows. He says, look, there's no question here that when we say Behaalotcha, we're talking about the lights. However, we also have the word et. And the Hebrew word et typically has no translation and serves merely to introduce an object. However, sometimes it has different meanings. As a very, very quick reference, if you're to look at the very beginning of Sefer Bereshit, when we see Cain and Havel, the psukim there say Vatelet et Cain, and then later on when it talks about Havel, it says V'tosef aledet et echav et Havel. And on that, Rashi says the fact that there are 3 ets here comes to indicate that there were actually twins or triplets born to Cain and Havel. That is to say, the et Cain means Cain had a twin sister. The et achid, et Havel, indicates that Havel had two sisters. They were triplets. And that, by the way, is one of the explanations as to what Cain and Havel were fighting about. Cain was jealous. He wanted the extra sister because that's obviously the way they populated the world. But anyway, this is only to show that the word et can have a different meaning. It comes to teach us something else. So says Rav Gerwitz, what the et here is doing, et can sometimes mean with. Now it says Behaalotcha et hanerot. It means not only that you should kindle the lamps, right, that you should raise up the lamps, but that the Kohen who's lighting should be raised up with the lamps. He should be elevated with the kindling of the lights. And the reason why this is such an important message is because the menorah is a symbol for Torah, right? And what this means to say is the lighting of the lamps means that represents Torah discourse, it means Torah learning, right? The engagement in learning. And we learn that through this. Through engagement in learning, the Kohen is meant to be elevated. And of course, all of us are meant to be elevated as we learn Torah. Now, why is this such an essential idea? Because at the end of the day, and this is spoken of by Rav Aaron Feldman, and there are countless sources for this, Torah learning isn't meant to be used simply as an intellectual pursuit, as something intellectually stimulating, which it certainly is, be it with the Gemara, just learning like the Chumash with Rashi, right, and all the different questions on Rashi, what are the questions that Rashi is asking on the Chumash. That in itself is very intellectually stimulating. It's not even meant to only be spiritually uplifting. It's meant to change us. It's meant to elevate us as people. We're supposed to change because of this. Now, the reason why that's so important is because sometimes when you learn a legal document, that doesn't necessarily have the effect. As an example, in property class, this was obviously last year, almost 2 years ago now, we learned one of the most famous cases probably in, intellectual property or property rights in general in the modern age. This is say property rights over one's body. Now, by that I mean, I'm quoting, of course, Moravy, the Regents of the University of California. Now, what happened was, back in 1990, there was a case, and this happened in the late 70s and early 80s, where there was a patient, Moore, who had hairy cell leukemia, and so he went to the University of California to get treated, and they're treating him, and as they're taking samples and testing his blood, and doing all the things that doctors are meant to do to try to heal him, the treating doctor there noticed that Moore's cells had a very unique feature, which he realized the possibility of commercializing this product. And so after the operation and for several years after, Moore kept coming in for these tests and these follow-up visits, but the doctor was taking his blood cells and effectively using it to try to develop a line that he could patent. Now, Moore's attention, and by the way, Moore eventually moved to Seattle, and he would keep flying into to LA for these follow-up visits until the point where he was getting tired of it and he didn't want to keep flying in. So he asked the doctor, "Is it okay if I just stay in Seattle and see a doctor here?" And so the doctor and the university were like, "No, no, look, we'll fly you in and we'll accommodate you," okay, without telling him why. They kept flying him in until Moore got suspicious, and he figured out what was going on there when he brought it to a lawyer. And they found that they had patented the product, and he sued because they were using his blood tissues and his marrow, etc., in order to develop this patent line. Now, the Supreme Court of California eventually decided that Moore had no rights in his previous samples because it was really just meant to be thrown away. He didn't recognize the value of it, and it was meant to be thrown to the garbage. I'm not going to go into the exact details. I can't remember exactly what happened. But the point is, they said you do not have property rights in something that was meant to be discarded because that's not the purpose for which you gave it. And that's fine. That's fine. These are very interesting and important policy decisions that must be made. Because keep in mind that these products ultimately benefited the public, right? It was meant to heal other people. But you can't help but read the story and kind of start asking questions about the ethical issues here with the treating doctor and the medical facilities in which Moore was treated. At the end of the day, he was manipulated into just not being told what exactly was being done with him. And it's something very distasteful, and of course the dissent speaks it out, and fine. Now the reason why I bring this up is because often when you examine a legal issue, you're trying to deal with the intellectual ramifications for this, what are the policy ramifications, how do we deal with this, etc. Judaism, of course, needs to deal with similar issues. Judaism is a body of law. The halacha needs to know what is the right decision to make here. And yet there's an overall change of tone when you see Torah learning. Because in the law, all we care about is the policy decision. Well, what's the actual law? That's fine. And the fact is, we didn't really talk about the ethical decisions here. I mean, maybe it was a side point, but at the end of the day, the important thing was, what are the property rights issues here? What are the property rights issues here? What are the policy decisions that need to be made? What is the intellectually correct way of deciding this case? Well, the Torah goes further, because the Torah is meant to go further, because the Torah isn't meant to just give us a body of law. It's meant to teach us how to act. And we see this in a very subtle and yet magnificent way when we read Parshat Mishpatim. We've spoken about this idea before. The concept of an eye for an eye. If a person takes someone's eye out, according to Torah law, what happens? You pay. There's a payment to be made, right? You have to pay him damages. And of course, the Gemara goes through this. Why is this? Because you can never know that, is one eye really equal to another? Maybe someone has better eyesight. Maybe they have prettier eyes. Maybe one eye is bigger. What the point is, there are the various reasons why we shouldn't actually take someone's eye out if you took someone's eye out. However, the Torah communicates, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye. Why does it do that? Says the Rambam, because it's trying to teach you how serious it is to take someone's eye out. The Torah doesn't want this to happen. Yes, we need to discuss the intellectual ramifications. How do we hold? What's the law? We get it. But the Torah is trying to communicate something deeper. This should never happen. When you're talking about taking someone's eye out, you shouldn't take someone's eye out. How bad is it to take someone's eye out? If you read the Torah, you'll have your eye taken out, because that's what you deserve. And that's what the Rambam says. We don't do that. And the point is, the Torah is trying to infuse into us a sensitivity to our surroundings, and that's something that other systems don't integrate. And moreover, says Rav Bernstein, he quotes a story by Rav Chaim Rav Brisk, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and this is a sharp story, but it's an important one. So there's a certain individual living in Brisk at the time that Rav Chaim was living, and he had amassed a great amount of Torah knowledge. Right? He was a very knowledgeable individual, had engaged his whole life in learning. Now, he didn't necessarily act in the way that was befitting someone with his amount of Torah knowledge. He wasn't acting like a Torah scholar ought to act. So Reb Chaim Brisker said as follows: I must tell you that seeing you brings to mind a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, right, which I think you embody in its totality. So at the end of the 5th chapter, it says as follows: Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekula ba v'bat techeze v'si v'bala ba umina lo tazua Shein lecha mida tova himena. Turn it over again and again, look into it and grow old and worn with it, and do not move from it. Of course, we're talking about Torah learning, for you have no greater measure than it. Now, the way we chose to translate midah is as a measure, but Reb Chaim Soloveitchik mentions that midah doesn't only mean measure, but it also means a character trait. So says Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, you have turned over the Torah again and again. You have looked into it and grown old and worn with it. You have invested many years in Torah study, and yet you have not been moved by it. Indeed, and these are the words of Rav Bernstein, quoting Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, indeed it is fair to say that you have not taken one good midah from it. That is the Mishnah that comes to mind whenever I see you. Because that is at the core of what learning Torah is about. The learning Torah is meant to transform your personality. It's meant to make you into a better person. It's meant to transform you completely. And that's what we see. Behaalotcha. When you raise the candles, you're meant to be raised up with it. You're supposed to be elevated with it in order to engage in Torah learning and to only see it as like, what are the policy decisions here? What are the intellectual ramifications? Okay, we get it. That's important, and we need to figure that out. Of course we need to figure it out. But there's something deeper going on here. Yes, we need to have proper laws to deal with incorrect situations when they come up, but the idea of the Torah is those incorrect situations should not come up. Why? Because that doctor should have just gone to Moore and said, hey, we discover something amazing about your cells that are very unique. Is it okay if we use them to patent them? First, they could have just, and this is, by the way, was dealt with in class. What if the doctor just said, we actually have something. Is it okay if you just sign off all of the potential intellectual, like all the potential patent lines that we could derive from this for the public? Or if they said, look, we'll give you a small percentage of the proceeds. How do you feel about that? More probably would have consented. But the idea is it was in this slippery, slimy type of way. And that's the kind of behavior that the Torah is trying to avoid. We'll leave it there. Shabbat Shalom.